The Surge is a game that you might not have heard about, but I've been very excited about this one for a long time. It's essentially Sci-Fi Dark Souls, and Dark Souls is one of my favorite games ever. Going right back to Demon Souls, I started playing that when that was released and have played every Souls game since, including Bloodborne, of course, and all the DLC for each of them. So I'm a huge Dark Souls fan, and I'm also a big sci-fi fan. So the idea of combining Dark Souls and sci-fi in one game is a very attractive proposition for me. The questions that I had going into this was how Dark Souls was the Surge, and in particular, what are the major differences between the Surge and Dark Souls? So in this video, I'm going to break down for you in a lot of detail how these games are similar and how they are different, and provide my overall impressions on the game after about 25 hours of play. So let's take it up at its highest level. If you were to ask me, hey, Skill Up, what's the major difference between Dark Souls and the Surge? I would say that it's their approach to difficulty. Now, structurally, Dark Souls and the Surge are almost identical. There's a whole bunch of stuff like, filing shrines and bonfires and Estus flasks and, respawning enemies and animations, and so much of it is so similar, and I'm going to talk about some of that in more detail soon. But the one big difference is that where Dark Souls likes to provide you with lots of really easy to kill trash mobs in between boss encounters, and the game is very much focused on reaching those boss encounters, and they're very much the centerpiece of the experience, the Surge instead removes a lot of the easy to kill trash enemies, such that any trash mob that you encounter, or almost any of them, are capable of killing you in 2 to 3 hits if you're not careful, and they also have a fair amount of HP themselves. The reason they've gone down this path is because the focus of the game is less on bosses and more on progressing through the tightly interwoven environment. Dark Souls is fundamentally a game about going from boss to boss, where the Surge is very much a game about getting from one area of the game to the next and fighting the very difficult trash that stands in your way. I think there's 2 ways to respond to the decision made by the developer to go down this path of having more meaningful trash enemies, all of whom can kill you really quickly if you make a mistake. The first way to look at it is to say that this is a good thing because it creates a more omnipresent sense of tension and risk. And certainly if you are going through the game with the intention of killing all of the trash mobs that you see, this is a very difficult game. Way more difficult than Dark Souls, in fact. And some people are really going to love that. And in fact, you are incentivized to actually kill the trash that you see, because doing so gives you valuable crafting materials as well as gear and weapon schematics that you can use for crafting. So there is an incentive for you to kill those enemies. You don't want to just run past all of them. So that added level of difficulty and that incentive structure supporting the crafting components can be viewed as really good. The other way to view it is to say, well, you're not getting a lot of chance to fight the enemies because a lot of the time you're not going to be fighting them, you're just going to be running past them. As you progress through the Surge, it becomes very clear that killing trash mobs is a highly inefficient way of progressing through the game. Dark Souls suffered from this a little bit as well, but it always struck a really good balance by combining the very easy to kill enemies with low HP, fairly low risk, with some of those larger, higher HP, higher risk enemies. Dark Souls got this balance right, and the effect was that you were very often fighting, you were swinging your weapon, you were engaging in combat, even while you were progressing through trash. What I found with the Surge was that I wasn't fighting anywhere near as often because the encounters were so challenging that it was actually far better for me to just run past everything, find the switch that I need to click it if I can, and if I don't and I die because I'm being swarmed by enemies, then come back to that same place, then kill the trash, and then click the button so I can progress through. So I think both of these views are really valid. I think it's totally valid to say that it's good that trash mobs are harder and that you're incentivized to kill them from crafting. Simultaneously, I think it's also valid to say that you don't get a lot of chance to fight enemies in this game, or not as much of a chance as you do versus playing Dark Souls, and that might frustrate people who are looking for a game that's more about the combat and less about just running through areas and finding the next doorway. So with that said, it probably is a good time to to talk about bosses. Yes, there are bosses in this game as well, but as I mentioned before, they are nowhere near as much of a focus. Over 25 hours, I have killed 3 bosses in total, and I haven't skipped any. I was just there with the 3 bosses that were available to me. So don't expect that this is going to be a big boss fighting game like Dark Souls games that you've played in the past. As I said, this is very much about progressing through areas, and the main enemies that you're facing are the trash, not the bosses. Having said that though, the 3 bosses that I fought were quite strong. Great mechanics, definitely took me a while to learn how to beat them. Really satisfying encounters. They certainly weren't lazy on this front. The boss encounters will please Dark Souls fans. So let's talk combat. Combat is fantastic in the Surge. I was extremely impressed by it. I know Lords of the Fallen, which is the previous game from this developer, got a lot of flack for the clunkiness of its combat. I can tell you that that is not a thing here. Combat here is up there with some of the best Dark Souls combat / animations that I've ever seen. It stems from a number of things. First of all, enemy animations and the way that they telegraph their attacks are really strong, and their movesets are really good. And the core of that, and again getting into some real detail here, is that it's always fair, right? I can always tell what an enemy is about to do. They don't bust out into unexpected and unfair movesets all of a sudden, just to make things hard for me for no reason. It all flows from their natural poise, their natural position, their stance. It is consistent, it's reliable, it's very strong. So enemy animations are a big tick. Further to that, my own animations feel great across different weapon types. I'm swinging and I'm, crushing and, I'm twisting and turning as I'm doing it. I'm able to do high attacks, or vertical and horizontal, and that works really well because there are some really great combos that I can sort of lean into as I progress. And as I fill up my stamina bar, and that gets longer, as I get more stamina, I'm finding that my combos are becoming longer, right? So you're going to have basic swing combos that are available to you, and as you put more and more points or stats into stamina, those combos will get longer to reflect the fact that you've got more energy to swing with. So all of that works super well. I don't imagine that any Dark Souls fan is going to walk into this game and be disappointed by the combat from an animations or enemy design perspective. I will talk about the targeting of enemies, or the targeting of their body parts, which has a few different functions. So in the Surge, you can actually independently target different parts of different enemies' bodies, typically their limbs, their chest, and their head. Really important to do this for a variety of reasons. Firstly, any unarmored parts of their bodies take more damage. So if you attack their arm, for example, and they don't have any armor on their arm, they will take more damage. They're going to die really fast. If, however, you choose to target one of the armored components of their body, what happens is that you have the opportunity then to do an execution at the end of that encounter that allows you to lop off that limb or that head or that body part or whatever, cut it off, and then you can very often pick up that item to use as crafting materials or as schematics so that you're able to craft new material yourself. So it's a really intelligent system that basically asks you to make a trade-off between killing enemies quickly versus killing them more slowly but getting materials out of it at the end. It is a fantastic trade-off. I think it's so smart. I think it really works extremely well, and it caters to your personal preference. If you're someone that wants to get through the game really fast and just kill everything quickly and safely, go for the unarmored body parts. If, however, you really want to enjoy the playthrough, you want to gear up, you want to build and craft as much as possible, hack away at those armored pieces, lop them off at the end of an encounter, take them back to your base, and then craft what you need to craft. But there are also a very large number of weapons that you can use, and each of them have different playstyles associated with them. There's your sort of twin daggers, so to speak. You're attacking quickly. There's one-handers, there's bow staves, and there's also huge swinging weapons like axes and great swords. They're not actually axes and great swords, of course. They're other things, but that's the easiest way to describe them. So the combat styles that you have available to you really feel very strong. Overall, I think the developer here has done a fantastic job of creating a very good, very chunky, very satisfying combat loop. I really love this. It's actually my favorite part of the entire game, and I really think it's where the Surge distinguishes itself as a title. So let's talk now about character progression. There's two fronts to it. There's your weapons and your armor, and there's also your core stats. As I've mentioned, you're going to be able to craft different weapons and armor from the body parts of your enemies, and you're going to upgrade those using rare metals that you find. If you played Dark Souls games before, you've been finding metals and you've been using them to upgrade your materials. It's exactly the same here. Dark Souls progression system for weapons and items is pretty much intact here on the Surge. Very similar to it also is the character progression system. So in Dark Souls, you would collect souls, and then you would take them back to someone, you would deposit them there, and that would then give you stats. In the Surge, quite similar, pick up scrap from your enemies, take that back to the ops station, operations base, and then take it to the med bay to deposit it, and you will then obviously gain more levels. Now, gaining more levels gives you more power in your suit, and power determines how many mods you can equip in your suit at one time and the quality of those mods, and the mods are what determine your stats. So the easy way to describe this is in Dark Souls, when you level up, you choose whether you want to put points into things like strength or stamina or whatever. Here in the Surge, the way you make those decisions is by choosing which mods you want to have active in your gear at any point in time. Some of them will give you straight up stats like stamina, for example, or health, but some of them give you really interesting on-use abilities. For example, the Estus Flask that you'd know from Dark Souls is a mod here in this game, and if you have it equipped in your armor, you give yourself a nice chunky self-heal that you can use. You'll get 3 charges of that, and it will recharge every time you revisit the medbay. There are also other types of injectables that leverage your energy bar. So what happens during combat is that your energy bar is charged. And after a while, you're going to get a certain amount of energy, allowing you to use some of your mods depending on the mods that you've chosen. These mods will do a whole bunch of stuff, like give you bonus damage, like heal you, like empower your special drone companion so it deals more damage, etc. There's actually a lot of depth that comes from this energy bar system and the way you can mix and match different mods within it. It's a really great layer of complexity that they've added to both the combat system as well as the core character progression system. So overall, another job well done here for the Surge. I think this is a very strong and very interesting character progression system that gives the player a lot of choice about what kind of character they want to build. If you want to build some big tanky dude swinging big two-handers with lots of health, you can do that. Simultaneously, if you want to be a lightning fast, lightly equipped twin dagger razor assassin using consumables that boost your damage after you've landed heaps of consecutive hits, you can do that as well. So, what else makes a Dark Souls game? Well, we've already spoken about difficulty, we've talked about enemy design, we've talked about bosses, the overall flow of combat, we've talked about character progression. I think the last dollop of secret sauce that holds the Dark Souls formula together is level design. Any Dark Souls fan knows that a Dark Souls game is only as good as the interconnected world that you're playing in, and I'm very pleased to tell you that they have done a great job here as well in building a world that is perhaps more interconnected and more Rabbit Warren-like than even a Dark Souls game. Dark Souls games typically feel quite large in scale and quite spread out almost. You're generally moving through very large areas that happen to be connected to each other in interesting ways. In the Surge, it's quite different. You're actually moving through very small areas and they can often feel quite claustrophobic. But the net effect of that is that they're very, very easily connected to each other. There are so many shortcuts, so many doors to open, so many ladders to unlock, so many barricades to bash through. It gets to certain points in the game where you don't go 2 minutes without unlocking some additional shortcut that leads you back to your bonfire, so to speak. So if you're looking for a truly interconnected world, there's absolutely no way that the Surge will disappoint you on that front. front. The overall meta structure for the game is that there is one Firelink shrine at the center of it all. Everything connects back to this central hub. And spreading off that, there are 6 different areas, and each of them have one medbay, which is the equivalent of your bonfire. This is fairly different from Dark Souls games where different areas can have multiple bonfires within them as you progress through them that serve as checkpoints. And that really goes to the sort of more linear nature of that level design. But here, the Surge is not linear level design, it's very much circular. Dark Souls games feel very much like getting from point A to point B, whereas the Surge, it feels like you're already at point A, you're just going around it in circles in a variety of ways until you eventually unlock what you need to unlock, and you can move to the next area. Now that isn't a bad thing, by the way. I certainly don't mean for that to sound like you're just going in circles aimlessly, seeing the same thing over and over again. You are not. You're always seeing different stuff. It's just a very different feel to the way you're moving through these levels. I think the trade-off with this, though, and it has to do with the setting that the Surge is set in, and that is that it all looks a little bit similar. You are moving through a giant industrial complex. So where Dark Souls gives us a huge amount of breadth in its visual palette, the Surge feels pretty homogeneous all the way through. If you want those really different, interesting, surprising environments, you're not going to find them here. Instead, you're going to find one space that feels pretty consistent all the way through. That didn't bother me in the slightest because I'm all about that gameplay experience more than anything else, but do be ready for that shift. The big question that you're probably going to have, though, is this actually good, especially if I've already played heaps of Dark Souls games? And my advice to you is that yes, this is a good game, and it is actually surprisingly different in terms of how it feels while you're playing it versus a Dark Souls game. I'm pretty much done with the Dark Souls formula by now, to be honest. I went into this excited, hoping that it could deliver me something vastly different, and while I wouldn't call it vastly different, I would call it different enough. I would call it fresh enough that it's definitely held my interest over this time, and I'm actually really excited to go back and continue playing it after this video. It's not perfect by any means. I personally don't prefer the choice that it's made with regards to enemy difficulty. I prefer the Dark Souls option. However, that's my personal preference, and I really respect the fact that the developer has gone its own way and tried something different. However, I think on every other front, I really like what they've done with the game, and I think it's just a solid effort overall. For any really rusted on Dark Souls fan that actually still has a little bit more Dark Souls in them, or is hoping for something that sort of, freshens up the formula a little bit, I think there's a good chance that you'll like the Surge. There's going to be lots of people that don't like it because Dark Souls has a very rusted on, loyal community, and they're not going to like the idea that this game is copying so much from it. And then yes, absolutely, so much of this game, structurally, is copied directly from Dark Souls. But there's enough new stuff in there that I think makes the experience worthwhile in and of itself, and so I would recommend checking it out. I'm going to have a complete review up on my channel on Tuesday the 16th, which is when the review embargo expires, so do check out for that. I'm also going to be putting up the first hour of gameplay on my channel. That's going to be available at the same time that this video is available, so check that out straight after this if you like. You'll see there that I comment that it feels a lot like Dark Souls, and it certainly does in that first hour, and the differences really begin to show themselves only after that first hour, funnily enough. So yeah, you'll get a sense of the journey that I go through from the time where I played that game the very first time to the impressions that I'm putting together now, and then finally the review that I'll release on Tuesday. Guys, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate your time as always. If you liked the video, do drop it a like, and also consider subscribing to the channel if you're interested in that sort of thing. For now, thank you for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.